My name is Jack Turner, and I'm 65 years old now, old enough to have seen the world change more times than I can count, but not too old to remember the moments that carved themselves into my bones like initials scratched into an old workbench. And if you've ever lived your whole life working with your hands, real work, the kind that leaves your knuckles scarred and your nails permanently stained, then you know exactly what I mean when I say the smell of metal becomes a part of you. It settles in the cracks of your skin, seeps into your clothes, and follows you home no matter how hard you scrub in the sink underwater, so hot it turns your fingertips pink. I used to hate that smell, especially in the early mornings when my reflection in the bathroom mirror looked like a man worn down by years of grease, long hours, and busted engines that didn't care if it was Christmas or my anniversary. But the day I found my name on the billionaire list, me, Jack Turner, the same man who once patched up beat-up trucks for $50 and a handshake, the day the world finally saw something in me that the woman I shared a bed with never did, that smell suddenly felt like a badge of honor, like the scent of every sacrifice I had ever made paying me back in a way money couldn't. Long before the wealth, long before the spotlight, long before strangers on the internet argued whether my rise was luck or grit, I was just a man who couldn't seem to outrun the voice of the woman who should have believed in me the most, a wife who didn't see value in my calloused hands or the sweat on my brow. A wife who rolled her eyes when I talked about the little shop my father left me. A wife who told me flat out, without blinking, that I would never be more than a grease monkey. A man she said embarrassed her when we went out in public because my hands weren't smooth like the husbands of her friends. A man she fully believed would die broke and forgotten. And I guess this story really began on the night she let the quiet truth slip from her lips, the night she delivered the words that didn't just hurt. They lit a fuse inside me I never knew existed. I can still see her standing there under the yellow kitchen light, arms crossed, that familiar look of disappointment twisting her face into something cold, almost smug. "Jack, you're just a mechanic. You'll never be anything more. You're holding me back." She said it like she was reciting a fact from a textbook. And in that moment I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I didn't even stand up from the chair that had molded itself to my body after years of late dinners and quiet arguments. I just stared at her, at the woman I had spent decades trying to love right, and something deep inside me snapped, not loud, not dramatic, but quiet, sharp, and final, like the sound of an old wrench twisting against a stubborn, rusty bolt right before the metal gives way. A crack you don't hear with your ears, but you feel in your chest. And as she turned away, shaking her head like she was the one disappointed in me, I realized this wasn't just a marriage falling apart. This was the moment the old version of me died. This was the moment the man who settled, the man who apologized for everything, the man who let someone else define his worth, was buried. And he had to be buried, because the man I became after that moment, the man she never believed I could be, was the one who turned everything around. This is the story of how my wife's betrayal didn't just crack me, it destroyed everything I thought I was, and how the revenge I never planned, the revenge that grew naturally out of pain and humiliation and years of being underestimated, changed not only my life, but my future, my legacy, and every single person who ever looked at me like I was less. I wasn't born a headline. I wasn't carved out of money or molded in some fancy business school where people speak in acronyms and pretend they understand the stock market better than God himself. No, before the world slapped labels on me, entrepreneur, millionaire, stubborn son of a gun, I was just Jack. Just Jack from Turner's Auto, the shop my father built with his bare hands back in the days when hard work still meant something and men shook hands like they meant it. Turner's Auto wasn't just a business, it was a heartbeat, a living, breathing thing made of grease, steel, and stories. I grew up in that shop. My childhood smelled like burnt oil and metal shavings, and honestly I never wanted it any other way. While other kids played video games, I was learning how to pull apart carburetors before I even hit high school. When I turned 16, my dad tossed me a wrench and said, "If you can fix an engine, you'll never go hungry. Machines make sense. People, not always." Funny how right he turned out to be. I loved every inch of that shop. I loved the smell that settled into my clothes no matter how many times I washed them. I loved the way an engine coughed, sputtered, then roared back to life under my hands. I loved the clatter of tools hitting concrete, the flicker of fluorescent lights, and the grease that never quite left my fingers. Fixing cars wasn't just a job. It was a language I spoke fluently, one my father taught me, when I thought I would pass on Sunday. But Laura, my wife, she hated it with the burning intensity of 1,000 suns. She hated the way the shop dust clung to my hair even after a shower, hated the worn-out shirts I couldn't bear to throw away, hated that every person in town greeted me like they'd known me their whole lives. She especially hated when people called me one of the good ones, as if being decent was something to be embarrassed about. Laura wanted everything Turner's Auto didn't have. She wanted to live in a world with wine tastings, rooftop dinners, and curated Instagram lives. She wanted shiny, expensive things and shiny, expensive people around her. And at first, I didn't judge her for that. Wanting more doesn't make someone bad. But believing the person you marry will never be enough, that's where poison starts. I remember the night I realized her love for me had turned into something sharp, something cold. I was sitting at the kitchen table half asleep after a 14-hour shift. My hands were still stained with grease from working on an old Ford that refused to cooperate. I was too tired to eat, too tired to think. The front door opened, and Laura walked in wearing a dress so elegant it looked like it belonged on a runway instead of a birthday party. Her heels clicked on the tile like each step was announcing something. Even before she spoke, I knew the conversation wasn't going to end well. Her perfume hit the room first, heavy, expensive, foreign, like everything else she'd grown to love more than me. She glanced at me with this curled lip, like she'd stepped in something rotten. "Jack," she said, dropping her purse on the table in a way that made it clear she didn't care where it landed. "Do you ever think maybe this life is enough for me?" At first, I thought she was joking. I blinked at her slowly, trying to process her words through the exhaustion fogging my brain. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice rough. "We've got a home, food on the table, the shop is doing fine." She laughed, a sharp, sterile laugh, the kind that doesn't come from humor, but from a place that wants to cut. "Jack, you're a mechanic. Do you hear yourself?" she said, shaking her head. "This isn't a future, this is a dead end." I should have said something strong, something that defended who I was and what I worked for. But in that moment, the words slipped out of me like oil leaking from a cracked pan. I just sat there, my hands trembling, the sting of her voice sinking into my bones. She didn't stop. "I want a man with ambition," she went on, packing the kitchen like a prosecutor in court. "A man who doesn't come home smelling like grease every day. A man who wants more than this." The humiliation rose in me slowly, like heat under a hood after the engine been running too long. There was anger too quiet, simmering, but buried under all of that was something worse, doubt. Because part of me wondered, what if she was right? That night planted a seed I didn't recognize yet. It wasn't betrayal, not then, but it was the first crack, the first sign that something inside our marriage was rusting from the inside out. For years after, I tried to become whatever version of me she wanted. I traded my work boots for polished shoes that blistered my feet. I bought shirts I couldn't pronounce the brand names of. I let her drag me to parties full of people who had never held a tool in their lives but thought they knew everything about hard work. And every time I tried, every time I reached just a little farther for her approval, I'd catch that same look in her eyes, disappointment wrapped in politeness, like she was always 2 breaths away from saying what she truly thought. "You'll never be enough for me." And maybe because I was blinded by love or loyalty or stupidity, take your pick, I ignored the red flags waving in front of my face. I ignored the late-night girls' outings, the whispered phone calls, the way she introduced me to her friends not as her husband, but as Jack. He's kind of like a handyman around the house. A handyman. Not a partner. Not a husband. Not the man who loved her since he was 21. Just a handyman. I kept telling myself marriage meant patience, that love meant compromise, that if I just worked harder she'd come back to me, that maybe, just maybe, one day she'd look at me with the same softness she used to have, before the world convinced her she deserved something shinier. But there are some things you can't repair. You can rebuild an engine. You can resurrect a dead battery. You can coax life back into a car that everyone else says is done for. But you cannot fix a woman who's already decided you are beneath her. And the night she finally said the words that broke me, the night she shattered whatever innocence I still had left, was the night everything shifted. The night everything changed. I should have known something was coming. Life has a way of whispering warnings before it strikes you across the face, but men like me, men who believe in fixing things, in gutting it out, in working harder when life gets rough, we tend to ignore those whispers. We believe problems can be solved with effort, with patience, with sweat. We are stubborn like that. But nothing, no warning, no whisper, no gut feeling, could have prepared me for what I walked into that night. It was a Friday, one of those long, relentless days that swallowed you whole. The shop was packed. Everyone wanted their cars tuned up before their weekend joys, family picnics, camping trips, fishing getaways. I was elbow deep in engines all day. 13 hours of repairs, busted bolts, stripped screws, and the constant hum of compressors and air guns. I was exhausted in the best way, physically drained but mentally steady. The kind of tired that tells a man he's done something real with his hours. I remember sitting in my truck for a moment outside the house, letting the engine idle as I rubbed the ache out of my shoulders. The sky was already dark, the air cool with that early evening breeze that carried the smell of pine and damp asphalt. I thought about leftovers, the spaghetti Laura had made 2 nights before. I thought about maybe surprising her with a hug, even though lately she stiffened every time I touched her. I even thought maybe tonight she'll smile at me, maybe she'll say she missed me. You'd be amazed how hope can survive in a man long after everything else inside him has started to die. But the second I opened the front door, that hope evaporated like gasoline on hot pavement. The lights were dim in the living room, not off, just low, soft enough to hide things, bright enough to reveal too much. And there she was, Laura, sitting on the couch. But she wasn't sitting the way a married woman sits when she's home alone. She was leaning in, her shoulders angled, her posture relaxed in a way I hadn't seen directed at me in years. And sitting beside her was Henry Dalton, her boss. A man who always smiled too wide at her, a man whose name she spoke with this casual fondness that used to dig into my ribs, but I told myself was harmless. A man she once described as safe and respectful and barely a threat. Turns out he was a bigger threat than anyone. Henry's hand was resting on her back, too low to be innocent, too familiar to be respectful. And her hand, God help me, was sitting right on his knee, her fingers curled just slightly like she'd been there a while. They saw me before I even had time to process the scene. They jolted apart like I'd walked in on them, setting fire to the living room. Laura stood up so fast she almost tripped, smoothing the front of her dress, like she could press the betrayal out of the fabric. Her eyes darted everywhere but at me. "Jack, you're home early." Home early, I had come home late, 2 hours late, and somehow she said it like I was the one ruining her evening. Henry stood next, clearing his throat, adjusting his shirt collar even though nothing about it was crooked. His face was red, guilty red, not embarrassed red, the kind of red that said he knew exactly how wrong this was. "Oh yes, well, I was just, stopping by to discuss her project." He said it like a question, not a statement, at 9:30 at night, on my couch, with wine glasses on the table, half full, one of hers smudged with lipstick. I stared at them, and in that moment something strange happened inside me. I didn't explode, I didn't shout, I didn't even step toward him. I felt empty, utterly, terrifyingly empty. "Discussing a project," I repeated, my voice somehow steady. "Must be one hell of a project." Laura shot me a look like I was the problem, like she was the victim in this whole thing. Like the sight of me standing in my own doorway was an interruption neither of them had prepared for. Henry scrambled to grab his coat, tripping over his own excuses. He apologized to her more than to me, which really told me everything I needed to know. He didn't belong in my house, and he damn sure knew it. He left in a hurry, practically jogging to his car like he expected me to chase him down with a wrench. Part of me wanted to. Part of me wanted to show him exactly what a harmless mechanic could do and pushed hard enough. But violence wasn't the answer, not that night. My anger didn't have anywhere to land because Laura, the woman who vowed to love me, to stay loyal to me, was still standing inside the house looking at me like I had offended her. When the front door closed behind Henry, the silence left behind was the thickest I had ever felt. Heavy, suffocating, like trying to swallow glass. I looked at her, really looked at her, and she didn't flinch, she didn't brace for impact, she didn't even pretend. I asked her straight out, my voice soft, because yelling felt too small for the size of the pain in my chest. Are you cheating on me? Silence. No denial. No outrage. No tears. No attempt to gaslight me with, "How dare you?" Nothing. Just the coldest quiet a woman has ever handed a man. She picked up her purse with a calm so cruel it physically hurt to watch, and said the words that would haunt me longer than anything Henry Dalton ever did. Maybe if you aimed higher in life, I wouldn't be tempted to look elsewhere. Those words didn't just hurt, they didn't just bruise, they detonated inside me like a grenade with no warning. Tempted. Look elsewhere. Aim higher. As if cheating was my fault, as if ambition was measured in cologne and tailored suits instead of sweat and hours and sacrifice, as if being a good man wasn't enough anymore. She kept talking, God, she kept talking, and every sentence felt like another blow. I need a partner with ambition. Henry understands my world, you don't. My world, her world, two different planets, apparently. She walked into the bedroom, shut the door, and left me standing in the hallway like a stranger who had broken into his own life. She didn't even look back to see if I followed, or reacted, or crumbled. That night I walked back out to my truck, not because she told me to leave. She didn't have to. I simply couldn't stay in that house for one more minute, breathing in air she had poisoned. So I climbed into the driver's seat, shut the door, leaned my head against the steering wheel, and let the weight of everything crash over me. The betrayal, the humiliation, the stupidity of believing I was enough for her. I slept there, in the truck I had rebuilt with my own hands, the truck that had never abandoned me, the truck that didn't care if I smelled like grease or failure or heartbreak. And as the night seeped into my bones, I realized something final. The life I thought I had was already gone. A lot of folks think revenge comes in one clean hit, like a punch thrown in a bar fight or a dramatic scene at the end of some Hollywood blockbuster. They picture one moment, one blow-up, one victory that makes everything fall into place. But real revenge, the kind that settles deep into a man's bones and feeds him for years, doesn't start loud. It doesn't roar. It doesn't explode. It starts as a whisper, a flicker, a tiny spark under the floorboards that no one notices until the whole damn house is burning. The morning after the night Laura carved a hole in my chest with her words, I woke up in the driver's seat of my truck, stiff as a rusted hinge. My neck ached. My back felt like someone had replaced my spine with rebar, but my mind, it was sharper than it had been in years. Too sharp, like someone had wiped the fog off a mirror and forced me to stare at myself. The sun wasn't even up yet. The sky was still that washed-out blue that sits somewhere between night and dawn. I didn't go inside the house, didn't even think about it. I drove straight to the shop. Turner's auto was silent, the kind of silence that makes you real aware of yourself. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and the familiar smell hit me. Engine oil, rubber, old metal, the faint scent of coffee that had soaked so deep into the walls it was practically part of the foundation. That shop had been my whole world. I stood there, right in the middle of the garage, staring around like I was seeing it for the first time. The old fluorescent lights buzzed weakly overhead. Dust floated through the beams like tiny drifting stars. The silence, the emptiness, it all felt different. Then I looked at the wall. My father's wrench set was still hanging there, the handles worn smooth from decades of work, his hands, then mine. The tools weren't just metal, they were history, lessons, everything he taught me about fixing more than just engines. Right beside it was the faded photograph from the day he handed me the keys to the place. He had this grin on his face, wide and proud, like I just won the Super Bowl instead of inheriting a shop with a leaky roof and a rusty sign. I remember that day. He said, "Jack, a man isn't measured by the shine of his boots but by the honesty of his work." And damn if I didn't live by that. So standing there in the quiet, staring at that picture, something clicked. A gear inside me shifted, slow but sure. Because Laura didn't just insult me. She insulted that wall. She insulted those wrenches. She insulted the man who raised me. She spit on the one thing I had built with my own two hands, something pure, something real. In that moment, the shame I'd been carrying turned into something else. Anger, yes, but not the wild, reckless kind. This was controlled, focused, like a blowtorch flame, small but powerful enough to melt through metal. I realized something brutally simple. I wasn't the problem. I had never been the problem. She was. Her ambition wasn't the issue. Hell, ambition is a fine thing. The issue was her arrogance. Her belief that value came from status, not character. Her belief that success was something shiny you could brag about, not something solid you built with your own hands. And if my life was going to change, it wouldn't be because she wanted it to. It would be because I wanted it to. I wasn't going to climb just to prove something to her. She wasn't worth that. I was going to climb because my father didn't raise a man who quits after one storm. I was going to climb because somewhere deep inside me, a fire that had been smothered for years finally found the oxygen it needed. It wasn't revenge yet, but it was the spark. Funny thing is, while I was standing there taking my first real breath of clarity in years, fate, strange, twisted, uncanny fate, was already rolling into motion like a domino chain I couldn't see yet. That same week, on a Tuesday afternoon, a man walked into the shop who would change the entire trajectory of my life. His name was Colin Ward. I remember him clearly because men like him didn't usually walk into places like mine. He stepped through the door in a tailored suit sharp enough to cut somebody. He carried a leather briefcase that cost more than my monthly mortgage. His shoes were shiny, expensive, the kind that had never stepped in a puddle, let alone a garage. He looked around, wrinkling his nose slightly at the smell of grease and metal, but not in a judgmental way, more like someone entering a world they didn't understand but were curious about. Turns out his Ferrari had broken down on the highway and the tow truck had brought it to me. Not because I was a Ferrari specialist, hell, I wasn't, but because I was the closest shop. He watched me work for a bit while sipping a coffee he brought with him from some high-end cafe. After 5 minutes, he raised an eyebrow in that curious way rich folks do when something surprises them. "You know," he said, "I've taken this car to mechanics in 3 different cities. None of them figured out what you did in 5 minutes." I wiped my hands on a rag that probably should have been retired years ago. Cars talk if you listen. He burst out laughing, amused like I'd told him some brilliant insider secret. "Is that right? I suppose most mechanics don't listen well enough then." He was studying me, not the way people study a problem, but the way they study a possibility. After a few minutes of conversation, he asked, "You ever consider working outside this little shop? Not that it's a bad place, but you've got something most people don't." I shrugged, uncomfortable with praise. "This shop is my life." He smiled like he already knew more about my future than I did. What I didn't know that day was who he really was. Colin Ward wasn't just a rich guy with a broken Ferrari. He was a venture capitalist. A man who built companies the way I rebuilt engines. A shark in a designer suit who usually only dealt with CEOs, founders, and inventors. But for some strange reason, maybe fate, maybe timing, maybe some cosmic joke, he liked me. He respected me. He saw something in me that I hadn't seen in myself for years. He asked questions, not shallow ones but real ones. How long had I been working with machines? Did I ever create custom solutions? Did I ever design tools to fix things that standard tools couldn't handle? Had I ever thought bigger than the cars in front of me? I laughed at some of it because it all sounded ridiculous. Me, a mechanic from a small town, designing something valuable, building something bigger. But Colin didn't laugh with me. He looked at me dead serious and said something that would stay welded into my memory forever. Jack, the people closest to you are often the last to believe in your rise because they've gotten used to your struggles. That line hit me so hard I stopped breathing for a second. Because it was true. Laura wasn't blind, she was comfortable. Comfortable seeing me small. Comfortable believing I was stuck where she placed me. Comfortable thinking I couldn't grow. Colin saw that truth instantly. My wife never did. That was the difference between them. He asked if I'd ever considered designing my own tools, equipment, or mechanical systems. I shook my head, that's not my world. But as I said the words, something inside me disagreed. Because after that night, the night with her boss, the wine, the betrayal, I no longer knew which limits were real and which ones were just cages built by people who doubted me. Destiny, fate, good timing, or the start of the greatest rebuild of my life. I didn't know it then, but that conversation was the first spark. And the fire was only getting started. Colin and I met for coffee the next week, though calling it a meeting feels too small for what it truly became. It was one of those early mornings where the sky still held a faint blue bruise from the night before, where the world hadn't quite woken up yet, where every sound echoed a little louder because the universe hadn't filled itself with noise. Colin picked a place downtown, glass walls, clean lines, baristas moving with the kind of indifference only expensive coffee shops can cultivate. He sat there in a perfectly pressed suit, sipping some $5 drink that smelled like burnt cinnamon and ambition. I, on the other hand, walked in with my usual gas station brew still in my hand, the one that tasted like someone boiled asphalt and hope in the same pot. He looked at the cup, raised an eyebrow, and then smiled like he already understood something about me that I didn't understand about myself. "Jack," he said as soon as I sat down, "I want to invest in you." For a moment, I thought he was joking. Then I thought it was a scam. Then I wondered if I was on some hidden camera show meant to humiliate middle-aged men who still believed in second chances. I stared at him, confused, because people like him didn't talk like that to people like me. People like me fix engines in old shops with oil-stained floors. People like me get told we should be grateful for what we have. People like me don't get approached by men with briefcases containing more money than the contents of my entire garage. So I asked him the only thing that made sense. Why me? Colin leaned back, studying me like he was examining the inside of an engine, not judging, just observing. "Because the world needs real creators," he said. "People who understand how things work. You're not just repairing machines, Jack. You're reading them. You see patterns. You see problems nobody else spots." It was strange hearing someone talk about me like that. Strange and uncomfortable. Praise is a foreign language when you've spent years being spoken to in criticism. But Colin wasn't finished. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice steady. "You have ideas, don't you?" I almost laughed. Ideas. I had notebooks full of them, sketches made during slow days at the shop, diagrams drawn on the backs of receipts, calculations scribbled between customer calls. I had dreams I'd never shown anyone because the one time I'd mentioned wanting to create something of my own, Laura told me I needed to be realistic, that I wasn't an inventor, that I should focus on doing my job well, not fantasizing about things out of my league. But Colin asked, and something inside me, something that had been beaten down but not fully broken, said, "Show him." So I did. I pulled out a stack of drawings I kept tucked in a binder. designs for faster hydraulic lifts, concepts for torque tools that reduced pressure injuries, diagrams for diagnostic systems that used vibration sensors to pinpoint internal engine issues. Things I'd built prototypes of in secret, using scrap metal and leftover parts. Colin's reaction was immediate. His eyes widened. His breath hitched. He looked at my sketches the way people look at treasure they didn't expect to find. "Jack," he whispered, running his hand over the pages as if they were made of gold, "these are brilliant." No one had ever used that word about me before. Not in school, not at home, not in my marriage, not once in my entire life. Brilliant. It landed on me like a revelation and a wound all at once. And right there, between the clatter of espresso machines and the hum of chatter, Colin made me an offer I never saw coming. He said he wanted to fund a small startup. He said I would be the creator, the designer, the hands and the mind. He said he would provide the capital, the structure, the doors I never had the keys to. We would split ownership, build something real, build something new. I should have told Laura, a good husband would have, but I couldn't. Not because I wanted to hide it, not at that moment anyway, but because I knew exactly how she'd respond. She'd laugh. She'd say I was being naive. She'd warn me about scams. She'd remind me of every financial struggle we'd ever had. She'd crush the spark before it ever had a chance to become fire. So I kept it to myself like a seed planted in secret. Colin and I filed the paperwork. We rented a warehouse that smelled like metal and potential. We bought equipment, real equipment, not the patched-together scraps I'd been using for years. And suddenly my life split into two worlds. Every morning, I'd open the shop before the sun came up, working on cars with the same calm precision I'd always had. But every afternoon, when most men my age were heading home for dinner, I drove to that warehouse, rolled up my sleeves, and began creating the tools I once thought only existed in my imagination. Hours didn't matter anymore. I'd stay until midnight, sometimes later, testing, welding, adjusting, drawing, failing, fixing, starting again. For the first time in years, I felt awake. Not just alive, awake. It was like discovering a version of myself I didn't know had been trapped inside me. A man who could build, a man who could innovate, a man who could imagine something greater. Meanwhile, back at home, Laura was slipping further away. She came home late, smelling of expensive perfume that wasn't hers. She stayed cold and distant, retreating into her phone or disappearing into other rooms. Sometimes she didn't come home at all until the early hours of the morning. She barely looked at me, except when she needed to criticize something. My hours, my clothes, my obsession with metal and machines. But the funny thing is, the more she drifted, the clearer everything became. Like someone was wiping fog off a window. The weight I'd been carrying for years, the doubt, the guilt, the constant feeling of being not enough began to fall away. I didn't even notice at first, but over time, every insult she threw at me hit a little less, because my heart was busy beating for something else. I was shedding dead skin, dead weight, dead dreams that were never mine to begin with. And without even realizing it, I had taken the first step toward the man I was meant to become, not for her, not for anyone else, but for myself. The first step toward the storm she never saw coming. Fast forward 18 months, though in truth, it didn't feel like a sprint or a blur. It felt like 18 months of building a new backbone from scratch, of reshaping myself piece by piece in that warehouse filled with sparks, metal, and ambition. Every hour I spent there hardened something inside me, sharpened something, awakened something I didn't even know had gone to sleep. And by the time those 18 months passed, the man who stood in that warehouse with oil on his hands and steel shavings on his shirt was not the same man who once sat at a dinner table being told he wasn't good enough to sit beside his own daughter. Colin and I had created something real, something more real than anything I'd ever built with my bare hands before. A device, a tool, a machine that didn't just help mechanics. It changed the way diagnostics were done. We named it the Raven because it saw everything, because it caught every whisper inside an engine, every tremor, every hidden fault. It was as if the machine had a sixth sense. It didn't just identify problems, it predicted them. And when we completed the final prototype, when I tightened the last bolt and connected the last sensor, I knew deep down in a place I'd never dared to trust that the world was about to shift. The day we unveiled the Raven to investors was the first day in years I felt scared. Not the fear of losing something, not the fear of failing someone. I'd lived with those kinds of fears for too long. No, this was different. This was the fear you feel right before the world sees you, really sees you for the first time. The kind of fear a man feels when he realizes he's no longer hiding behind excuses, circumstances, or limitations. I dressed in the same clothes I'd always worn, work boots, worn jeans, a clean shirt that I ironed 3 times trying to get the creases out. Colin, of course, walked in looking like success had tailored itself around him. But when he looked at me, he didn't see the clothes. He saw the machine. He saw the man behind it. The investors filled the room, suits, watches that cost more than my first truck, pens that clicked like weapons. They looked skeptical. They always do. A mechanic from a small-town garage wasn't the kind of person they expected to pitch groundbreaking tech. But when I powered on the Raven, when its sensors lit up with a quiet hum, when it scanned the demonstration engine in under 3 seconds and displayed the exact fault with perfect clarity, the room shifted. You could feel it. You could hear it. The sudden silence, the breath caught in throats, the tap of a pen stopping mid-click. The machine didn't just work. It exceeded every expectation. Colin shot me a look of pride, a look of vindication, a look that said, "I told you you were meant for more." And then the flood began. Within a week, 3 major auto chains reached out wanting to license the technology. Within a month, a major manufacturer sent an acquisition proposal that had more zeros on it than I'd ever seen in one place. Within 6 months, my bank account looked like a mistake. I kept checking it just to make sure the numbers were real. But for all the money, all the offers, all the business dinners and congratulatory messages, none of it was what mattered. What mattered was the feeling, pure, startling pride. The kind that grows in your chest until you feel taller, steadier, more solid. The kind I had forgotten existed. The kind I thought I wasn't allowed to feel anymore. For the first time in years, I wasn't surviving. I was rising. And fate, with its dark sense of timing, brought this success right when my marriage was crumbling into dust. One night after a 14-hour day at the warehouse, I decided to come home early. I don't know why, call it instinct, fate, or just the universe nudging me toward a truth I'd been avoiding. I walked in quietly, expecting to find the house empty or silent as it usually was. Instead, I heard laughter, her laughter, the kind she hadn't used with me in years. And there he was. Henry. Again. Sitting in the same goddamn chair he sat in the night everything cracked open. The same posture, the same smug expression that always hovered between pity and superiority. Except this time there was no fake story, no ridiculous excuse about helping with paperwork or just dropping by. This time, Laura wasn't pretending. She sat next to him, leaning in close, laughing like she hadn't laughed since before our wedding. Her hand brushed his arm, casual, familiar, practiced. And here's the part that still shocks me. I didn't feel anger, not rage, not disbelief. Just an empty kind of acceptance, like watching a door close that was never meant to stay open. Laura looked up, saw me, and didn't even jump. She didn't look guilty. She didn't look ashamed. She looked inconvenienced, like I had interrupted something she considered normal. "Jack," she said, her voice calm, almost bored, "I think we should separate." I nodded once. "Yeah, I think so too." She blinked, surprised. She wasn't expecting that. Women like her always expect the men they underestimate to crumble. She expected begging, tears, a fight, something to boost her ego and make her feel powerful again. but I felt absolutely nothing. And that terrified her more than any scream ever could. She glanced around the living room like she was touring a vacation rental she'd already grown tired of. She picked up her purse, flipped her hair over her shoulder, and smirked in that way she always did when she thought she'd won something. "You know," she said lightly, "you can keep this house. I'm moving in with Henry. His place is much nicer." That sentence didn't hurt because I still loved her. It hurt because she genuinely believed I needed her approval, her permission, as if I still lived in the world where she got to decide my worth. She walked out that night with 2 suitcases and not a single backward glance. She didn't touch the walls, didn't pause in the doorway, didn't look at the home we built together. She just left, quick, cold, clean. The woman who mocked me, the woman who doubted me, the woman who dismissed my dreams before they even formed. She walked out of my life without realizing she had already become irrelevant. Because she had no idea, absolutely no idea, what I was about to become. She thought she was leaving a mechanic. She didn't know she was letting go of a man about to set the world on fire. The divorce moved faster than I expected, almost eerily smooth, like she couldn't wait to cut the last thread that tied her to the life she once shared with me. There were no courtroom battles, no dramatic standoffs, no desperate pleas. No, she signed every paper with a casual flick of her wrist, as if she were signing a restaurant receipt. She didn't ask for alimony, because in her mind, I was still the man who counted bills twice and stretched a paycheck just to make sure the lights stayed on. She didn't want the house. She already had Henry's overpriced, modern, glass-walled dream pinned as her new kingdom. She didn't ask for the shop. She'd spent years telling me it was a hobby, a waste of time, a dead end. So why would she want anything to do with it? She wanted only one thing, one word she tossed out like it was some shimmering prize she'd earned through suffering. Freedom. She said it like she was breaking out of a prison. Except she wasn't the inmate. She was the warden. And the moment that judge stamped those papers, the moment she walked out of my life for good, I felt something rush through me, something warm, something electric, something I didn't recognize at first. It was relief. Pure, unfiltered relief. Not the relief of escaping something bad, but the relief of stepping into something good, something mine. She didn't take anything from me in the divorce, but what she left behind, what she walked away from, would haunt her for the rest of her life. Because the moment she freed herself from me, she also freed me from her. And a man without chains. A man with no one left to disappoint. No one left to apologize to. No one left to prove himself to. That man can do anything. And I did. For the next 3 years, I poured every ounce of my energy into the company Colin, and I built from scratch. The warehouse that once smelled of dust and ambition now smelled of steel, innovation and possibilities so big they almost scared me. We expanded our first product into a full suite of diagnostic tools, then into automated repair systems, then into AI-integrated scanners that could analyze entire vehicles faster than a technician could blink. Before long, our tech wasn't just in small-town repair shops anymore. It was in dealerships across state lines, then across the country, then across borders. By the end of year 3, I was spending more time in boardrooms than garages. Strange thing was, I missed the smell of oil more than the suits I was forced to wear. But every time I shook a CEO's hand, or finalized a deal worth more than my yearly income from the shop days, I felt something shift inside me. A quiet pride, the steady kind that grows when you remember who you were before anyone doubted you. By year 4, we went international. Germany, Japan, South Korea, countries whose automotive industries usually ignored foreigners, were suddenly calling me for partnerships. Engineers who once brushed past mechanics like they were invisible were now flying me out to speak at conferences, asking for my insight, my designs, my brain. My brain. The same one my ex-wife dismissed as simple. By year 5, the company's valuation reached a number so large I had to read it twice. Headlines started popping up online, articles calling me a visionary, a disruptor, a mechanic turned titan. Reporters asked me about my childhood, my shop, my process. People who never gave me a second glance were suddenly interested in everything from what pen I used to what brand of boots I wore. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened in year 6. I remember the morning perfectly. I was in my office, my real office, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a skyline I still wasn't used to claiming as mine. A stack of reports lay on my desk, my coffee was half finished, and my assistant rushed in with her tablet in hand, eyes wide. "Jack, you need to see this." I took the tablet, expecting an emergency. Instead, I saw my name. My full name. Big, bold, impossible to ignore. Forbes Billionaire list, new entry. Jack Turner, the mechanic who rebuilt the automotive world. I didn't breathe at first. Didn't blink. Didn't move. My hands shook, not from excitement, not from pride, not even from joy. But from disbelief. From the shock of seeing the world finally acknowledge the thing I had been fighting to believe about myself for decades. That I was capable of more. The kid who barely graduated high school. The man who fixed cars with his father's old wrenches. The husband whose wife rolled her eyes when he spoke. The guy dismissed as just a mechanic. The one mocked, belittled, underestimated. That man was now one of the wealthiest people in the country. And isn't it funny? Isn't it poetic? Isn't it the kind of irony life saves for just the right moment? Because right around that time, right when my life reached a height she never believed possible, the past knocked on my door. Not gently, not humbly, but with the desperate, greedy fists of people who only remember you exist when they need something. But she, the woman who left, she didn't just knock. She came crashing back like a storm I thought I'd outgrown. And she had no idea, absolutely no idea, what kind of man she was returning to. The thing about success, real, undeniable, world-shifting success, is that it makes the past crawl out of the shadows like moths drawn to a flame. You can ignore calls, delete emails, block numbers, but life has a way of pushing people right back into your path just to see what you'll do. And on this particular morning, clear skies, sunlight spilling through my office windows like gold, I felt something shift even before my assistant knocked. She stepped into my office, tablet in her hands, nervousness tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Sir," she said carefully, "there's a woman downstairs asking to see you. She says she's your ex-wife." For a second, just one, I froze, not because I still loved her, not because I was afraid, but because the universe has a twisted sense of humor. After all these years, after all the insults, betrayal, and silence, she had finally decided she had something to say. And I knew it wasn't going to be anything noble. My assistant added quietly, "Should I send her away?" I shook my head. "No, bring her up." I wasn't curious about her feelings. I wasn't hopping for closure. I wasn't looking for reconciliation. I just wanted to see the expression on her face when she realized the man she abandoned had built a world she never believed he could. A few minutes later, the elevator dinged and the doors opened. And there she was. Laura. Except she was the Laura I remembered. She wore a designer coat, cream-colored, soft, expensive enough to feed a small town for a month. A matching handbag, jewelry that sparkled under the office lights. Her hair was perfectly styled, makeup flawless, but none of it hid the truth. She looked tired, weathered, like life hadn't been as kind to her as she expected. Her eyes scanned the office, the high ceiling, the marble floors, the panoramic window behind me, and for a moment her jaw dropped open just slightly. Not dramatically, just enough for me to recognize it. Regret. Regret so sharp it could cut steel. When she finally looked at me, she smiled, soft, nervous, almost shy. A smile I had never seen on her face when we were married. "Jack, my God, look at you, you're..." I didn't let her finish. "What do you want, Laura?" Her smile faltered instantly. She shifted her weight, adjusting her purse, eyes darting everywhere except my face. "Well, I heard about your success," she said, trying to sound casual but failing miserably. "And I wanted to reconnect. Maybe talk, maybe catch up, maybe we could." I raised my hand, palm open, the universal symbol of stop right there before you embarrass yourself further. She froze. It felt strange, seeing her unable to complete a sentence. This was the woman who once spoke to me like she was giving instructions to a stubborn child. The woman who laughed at my dreams. The woman who told me I'd never amount to anything. Now she couldn't even speak without trembling. "Laura," I said, my voice steady, calm, almost gentle, "you only love the man you wanted me to be, not the man I actually was." Her lips parted slightly, and she swallowed hard, so hard I could hear it across the room. I made mistakes, Jack." "I know," I said, "we all do." She stepped closer, eyes glistening. "Henry, he wasn't who I thought he was. He lost his job, he started drinking. She stopped herself, shaking her head as if suddenly embarrassed to admit the truth. Of course he wasn't who she thought he was. She traded loyalty for luxury. And ended up with neither. She whispered, "Jack, I miss you." The words should have stung. They didn't. Instead, they floated between us, empty and hollow, like words spoken into an abandoned house. I leaned back in my chair, hands folded in my lap, and gave her the coldest truth I'd ever spoken in my life, each word heavy enough to break whatever hope she had clung to. "And now," I said quietly, "you get to live with them." Her face crumpled, not beautifully, not cinematically, but painfully. Her mascara smudged, her breath hitched, her shoulders shook. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, smaller than the anger she once carried, smaller than the pride she once flaunted like a badge. "Jack," she whispered, "please, I didn't know, I didn't think." I stood up slowly, not to threaten her, not to intimidate her, but to end this scene she had carved out of her own regret. I opened the door. "Sarah," I called to my assistant, "please see her out." Laura reached out a hand as if to touch my arm, but I stepped back before she could. This woman, this ghost from a past life, had no place in the world I built from the ashes she left. As my assistant gently guided her toward the elevator, Laura looked back one last time. And for the first time in all the years I'd known her, her eyes held nothing but the raw, brutal understanding of what she had lost. Not my money, not my success, not the empire. She lost the man she never believed in, the man she mocked, the man she left behind thinking he'd never rise. And in that moment, watching her disappear behind polished elevator doors, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not satisfaction, not triumph, just peace. Pure, quiet, absolute peace. And I realized then that sometimes revenge isn't loud. Sometimes revenge isn't dramatic. Sometimes revenge isn't something you do. Sometimes revenge is simply becoming the person they swore you'd never be. Time has a funny way of revealing truth, slowly, quietly, almost politely at first, and then all at once like a punch you never saw coming. About a year after she showed up in my office, shaking, pretending she still had some dignity left to cling to, I got the update that made me pause mid-sip of my morning coffee. It didn't come dramatically. No phone call, no email, no confrontation. Just a passing comment from a mutual acquaintance, the kind of person who always somehow knows everyone's business before they know it themselves. He said it casually, like he was mentioning the weather. "Hey Jack, did you hear? Henry left Laura. For a second I didn't react. The words floated in the air and I just watched them settle almost weightless. Then he kept talking too much, too eagerly. Apparently Henry had run off with a younger woman, someone who worked with him. Someone who probably reminded him of the version of himself he always pretended to be. A shiny new distraction, just like Laura once thought he was for her. And in that moment, in that simple little sentence, the universe showed me it had a sense of humor. Not only had Henry left, but he drained her too. Took half her savings, the very money she once bragged about, the money she chose over loyalty, over marriage, over building a life with me. He cleaned her out with the same precision she once used to clean out my heart. And just like that, the woman who walked out of my life wearing a smirk and carrying her pride like designer luggage was now living in a small apartment. Tiny, cramped, nothing like the picture-perfect life she thought she upgraded to. Word was she was working a job she couldn't stand, clocking in and out under fluorescent lights, surrounded by people who didn't know her past and wouldn't care even if they did. It was poetic, honestly, because life, as I've learned, keeps every receipt. She once stood in our living room and told me I was a dead end, like my entire existence was some dusty back road leading nowhere, while Henry's life was a bright highway she could speed down forever. She said it with so much confidence, with so much certainty, as if she'd already seen the future and I wasn't part of it. But now she was the one trapped in the dead end she paved with her own decisions, her own selfishness, her own hunger for something shinier than loyalty. People always ask me the same question when I tell them the story, or even just the outline of it. They ask why I didn't get revenge, why I didn't use my wealth, my influence, my connections to ruin her the way she once tried to ruin me. Why I didn't send lawyers or investigators or some small army to make her life crumble the way she celebrated when she thought mine had. Why I didn't make her pay. But the truth is, and it took me years, pain, rebuilding, and millions of dollars of growth to understand this, revenge is too small for the life I built, too small for the man I became, too small for the peace I earned. You see, real revenge isn't about tearing someone down. That's easy. Anyone can do that. Anyone with enough anger, enough spite, enough time on their hands can wage war on a person. But that kind of revenge keeps you tied to them forever. It keeps you reliving the hurt over and over again, fueling it, feeding it, keeping it alive like some wild animal that never grows tired. But the best revenge, the sweetest revenge, is getting to a place where their name doesn't make your blood boil anymore. Getting so far ahead that you look back and barely recognize the life you once lived with them. The best revenge is building something so powerful, so fulfilling, so undeniably beyond what they ever believed you were capable of, that their betrayal becomes nothing more than a plot twist in a story that ended up becoming legendary. And the sweetest justice of all, watching them crumble under the weight of their own choices. Watching them face the very consequences they once thought they were too clever to ever encounter. Watching them learn that every shortcut, every lie, every selfish decision eventually circles back around. Without me lifting a finger. So no, I didn't destroy her. I didn't have to. Life did that for me. And I just kept moving forward, one step, one success, one victory at a time, leaving her behind exactly where she chose to stand. Time doesn't move in a straight line the way we wish it would. It bends, it loops, it circles back on itself, forcing you to face old ghosts just when you think you've finally outrun them. But it also heals, slowly, quietly, in places you don't even notice until one day you wake up and realize something heavy you've carried for years isn't there anymore. That's what happened to me. Little by little, year by year, I rebuilt everything she had cracked inside me, every part of myself I once believed wasn't enough. I didn't realize it as it was happening, but looking back, I can see that every step I took away from the life she abandoned brought me closer to the man I was meant to become. It started with small things, like speaking up more in meetings, trusting my own ideas again, allowing myself to take risks without that echo of her voice telling me I'd fail. Somewhere along the way, my self-doubt turned into certainty. My exhaustion turned into determination. My heartbreak turned into fuel. I became someone people came to for direction, not because I demanded respect, but because I earned it. I found myself teaching young mechanics who reminded me of the kid I used to be, the one with grease on his hands and big dreams he was too ashamed to say out loud. I watched their eyes light up when they understood something difficult for the first time, and I realized that I wasn't just fixing engines anymore. I was shaping futures. People started calling me an inventor, though I still think of myself as someone who just likes solving problems. But the truth was bigger than that. I built things that changed the industry. Tools, systems, devices, things companies fought for, things dealerships couldn't operate without, things factories incorporated into their production line. Suddenly, the kid who once worked in a rundown garage was someone executives called for advice. They flew across states just to shake my hand. They invited me to conferences, panels, events where people in suits would talk about innovation, while I stood there in the same rough palms and calloused fingers I'd always had. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't embarrassed about it. Those hands built everything I had. As the years passed, I traveled, not the kind of traveling where you post pictures to show off, but the kind where you discover pieces of yourself in places you've never been. I walked through engines plants in Japan, ate dinner with engineers in Germany, stood on rooftops in Singapore watching a world I never imagined being part of. Every place I went, every person I met added something to the man I was becoming. I made friends, real friends, the kind who weren't impressed by money or success, the kind who knew me before the headlines and didn't care about them after. And somewhere in that whirlwind of growth, I met someone who saw me, truly saw me. Not the billionaire, not the businessman, not the guy whose name appeared in magazines. She saw the man who still wiped oil on his jeans when he forgot where the rag was. The man who sometimes worked until midnight because an idea wouldn't let him sleep. The man whose hands were rough not because he didn't take care of himself, but because he'd spent his life building things instead of pretending to be someone he was. She loved that man. Not the polished version, not the reinvented one, but the real one. And for the first time in a long time, I realized I didn't need to perform for anyone. I didn't need to shrink myself or reshape myself to fit into someone else's dream. I didn't need to apologize for the things that made me who I was. My company kept growing, faster than even I could process sometimes. New warehouses, new technologies, new partnerships. There were weeks when everything felt surreal, when I'd stand on the upper floor of my factory, overlooking dozens of workers using tools I once designed in my garage, and I'd feel this overwhelming rush of gratitude. My heart, the same one that had been broken, stepped on, dismissed, and replaced, somehow repaired itself. Not in a single moment, not with a dramatic epiphany. Just one quiet day after another, healing in the background while I focused on building a life worth living. I still walk into my factory sometimes at dawn before the noise and movement begin. That moment right when the lights flicker on and the air hasn't warmed yet, the smell hits you first. Engine oil, warm steel, rubber, machine grease. It's the smell of work, of foundation, of beginnings. It's the smell she once wrinkled her nose at, acting like my world was somehow beneath her. Funny thing is, that smell paid for everything I own now. That smell made me a billionaire. That smell turned into innovation, into power, into a legacy bigger than the both of us. And it taught me something I wish I had learned sooner, something I hope every person who's ever been told they're not enough understands. You don't change for someone who can't see your worth. You don't become smaller to fit inside someone else's expectations. You don't twist yourself into a version they approve of. You grow for yourself. You change because life requires it. You evolve because you're meant to. And if someone can't walk beside you while you become the person you're destined to be, then they were never meant to stay. In the end, everything I became, every achievement, every lesson, every victory, wasn't in spite of what she did. It was because I finally stopped letting her define who I was. I found the man I always had inside me, and he was more than enough. If you're listening to this, really listening, then maybe you're standing in the same place I once stood. Maybe you're at the edge of something heavy, something painful, something that makes you question your own worth. Maybe you're sitting in a quiet room right now, wondering how the hell you got here, wondering why the people who should have believed in you the most turned out to be the ones who clipped your wings. Maybe you've had someone point at your dreams and laugh, someone who said your goals were foolish, someone who couldn't see past the version of you they boxed you into. And if you've ever felt that weight, if you've ever felt small, underestimated, mocked, dismissed, or pushed into a corner, then hear me when I say this next part. Don't you dare believe a single word they said about you. Because here's a truth I learned the long, painful way. People who doubt you aren't predicting your future. They're revealing their own limits. They look at your potential and it scares them. They see how high you could climb, and it threatens the tiny world they've built for themselves. They try to keep you small because your growth highlights the places where they stopped growing. They try to quiet your dreams because your ambition exposes their comfort. They want you stuck, not because you belong there, but because that's where they feel safest, with you beneath them, beside them, predictable, controllable. But your value does not belong in their hands. Your potential is not something they get to measure. Your future is not something they get to write. Your story is yours, and only yours, to shape. My wife once looked at my hands, hands that fixed engines, hands that built parts, hands that worked through cold nights and long days, and she laughed. She saw dirt, grease, roughness. She saw something beneath her. But what she never understood is that those dirty hands were building a foundation she couldn't imagine. She mocked the very thing that would one day make me unstoppable. Those hands, the ones she dismissed, the ones she told me were embarrassing, ended up building an empire. They designed tools that changed an industry. They lifted me out of the small life she thought I was meant for and placed me in rooms I never dreamed I'd walk into. And every time I looked down at them during those years, still rough, still scarred, still carrying marks from the life I once lived, I felt proud. Because those hands didn't need her approval. They needed my belief. There will always be people like her. People who only love you when you're convenient. People who want you when you're easy to control. People who leave the moment you grow beyond what they can handle. And losing them will hurt. I won't pretend it won't. But sometimes loss clears the path for everything you were meant to gain. The people who try to break you are often the ones who show you exactly what you're capable of surviving. The ones who abandon you often make room for the ones who will cherish you. The ones who laugh at your beginnings never see your endings. And people like you, the ones who work with your hands, your mind, your heart, the ones who push through hardship, who wake up early, who stay late, who dream secretly in the quiet corners of your life, you're the ones who build the world. You're the ones who turn ideas into reality. You're the ones who can take nothing and turn it into something. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. So if you're standing in your own moment of doubt, if you're hearing echoes of someone else's disbelief in your head, I want you to push back. Push back hard. Don't shrink yourself to fit the smallness of someone else's vision. Don't dim your fire to make someone else comfortable. Don't hold yourself back because it makes someone else feel better. You are not put here to live inside someone else's limitations. You were put here to rise. And if you ever wonder what real revenge looks like, let me tell you, it's not destruction. It's not getting even. It's not proving someone wrong for the sake of hurting them. No. The best revenge is rising so far above the place they left you that they can't even see you anymore. The sweetest revenge is living a life so full, so rich, so meaningful, that their opinion becomes irrelevant. The most powerful revenge is becoming the person they never believed you could be, and doing it without needing them at all. The moment you stop looking backward and start building forward, that's the moment you win. That's the moment everything changes. That's when you take your story back. So hear me, truly hear me. You are more than the words that broke you. You are more than the expectations that limited you. You are more than the doubts someone else projected onto you. And you are absolutely, unquestionably capable of becoming something they never saw coming. Because one day, when you're standing in the life you built with your own hands, you'll look back at the people who doubted you and you won't feel anger. You won't feel bitterness. You'll feel gratitude. Because without knowing it, they pushed you toward the version of yourself you were always meant to become. And that version of you, that strong, resilient, unbreakable version, they'll never recognize them. But you will. And you'll finally understand the truth I learned the hard way. The greatest revenge, the sweetest revenge, is simply becoming unforgettable.